Hey, you're watching HuffPost Live. I'm Mark Lamont Hill. People around the country are gathering to rally after the death of teenager Michael Brown, the young man who was shot by Officer Darren Wilson in Ferguson, Missouri. The faces of the protesters range from old to young, and as children are beginning to join their parents on the front lines of the protest, people are asking questions like, why is it important for children to witness the situation in Ferguson, and how can parents talk to them about what's going on? To discuss this, we are joined by some moms who brought their children to Ferguson protests. We're joined by Betsy Resnicek, Crystal Madison, and we're also joined by Treasure Shields Redmond, as well as Kendra Pearson, who brought her children to rallies in Atlanta. And in addition to those wonderful mothers, we're joined by Chad Dion Lassiter. He is a professor of race relations at Westchester University and also the president of Black Men at University of Penn School of Social Policy and Practice. All right, I'm going to start with you, Betsy. What do you make of the idea of bringing children to these protests?
I think it's really important that we bring kids to witness all kinds of things that happen in our lives. And for what's happening in St. Louis right now, the death of Michael Brown is very, it's going to be historical in how we shape relationships between individuals, relationships in the city-county divide here in St. Louis. And I want my daughter and my son to see how that impacts them from a very young age and to be able to have the skills from an early onset to have those conversations.
Speak to me a little bit more about those skills you just mentioned.
I don't think that we can, you can adequately talk about some of these issues as an adult unless you've been around these conversations as a child. So in my household, we grew up not really talking about politics, not talking about Democrats, Republicans, or anybody. And so I kind of had a huge learning curve in having to learn some of this. So I want my kids to have all kinds of different experiences, whether that's that we go to different kinds of restaurants or different kinds of parks or different kinds of churches. But I want them to witness and kind of be able to find, have different experiences that allow them to shape and frame the world that they're going to grow up in.
Treasure, I saw you nodding. What say you?
You know, I consider myself part of a line of public intellectuals. I consider myself descended from, Sojourner Truth or our living ancestors that exist and agitate now. And I think that in order to keep the ancestry moving forward, that we have to have these conversations with children when they're very young and take them to experiential learning about social justice and about walking the walk of our belief in total equality.
You mentioned walking the walk, and that's really important. What does that mean in practical terms for you?
Well, for me, it means being careful about what my children ingest into their spirit and what they put out into the world. It's very important for me for them to feel as if they are capable and as if they're able to change their surroundings and not just are at the whimsy and whim of, structural inequality, structural bias, that they have a legacy of people who've made inroads. So it's important for me to show them in my daily life that bending the arc toward the arc of the universe toward justice is a lived practice.
Now, it's a lived practice, but it's also a dangerous practice. That's why I was curious to know, Betsy and Treasure, because I was down there, and I saw, I was flushing tear gas, we're flushing tear gas out of somebody's eyes. We couldn't see, a guy next to me was shot. He wasn't killed. The guy next to me was shot, and I kept thinking, and I was 50-50 on bringing my daughter there until they imposed the curfew. And then I said, you know what? When I head down there, I can't bring her because I'm worried about the danger of it. How do you navigate that issue?
Well, I didn't feel as if I was putting my children in danger. We did daytime peaceful protests. They also came with me to a church, a United Church of Christ Church, where the governor was present and the mayor of Ferguson and the police chief that was eventually deposed or replaced. So I've kept it safe. But I have to say that being a Black boy, and I'm raising a 13-year-old son, that being a Black boy won't ever really be safe. So at some point, we've got to cut our losses. Are we going to be unsafe in the service of justice, or are we going to, be safely ensconced in our home and away from the protests?
Betsy, how about you? Was danger an issue something you concern? I mean, and even in the day, and I agree with Treasure. I mean, the daytime certainly was very different. In the daytime, I saw lots of kids. As 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock rolled around, things started to shift. But even in the daytime, there were people who were shot. We saw one 8-year-old get tear gas. It was later in the evening, but still, I mean, we saw some pretty intense stuff.
Yeah, I mean, we certainly considered it and talked about it with my husband. And who else do we know that's going down there? What time of day is it? What is our plan? And again, we went during a Saturday afternoon and also attended the event at the church. And we talked about it, but I do agree with Treasure. There's an impact you have to weigh, and recognizing all the beautiful and weighing all the beautiful things that were happening on that Saturday as well. And I wanted them to see that. I wanted to have them see a community that was coming together and joining hands. And it didn't matter how old you were, what color you were, what religion you were. People were gathering down at the site of where Michael Brown was murdered, and they were, singing his praises and trying to come together as a community. And that far outweighed any worry that I had at the time. And to be a part of people sharing food, and the ice cream guy handing out ice cream, and, kind of lifting our voices and seeing our community rise out of something that was so terrible. I certainly had concerns. At one point, the police, the State Highway Patrol comes barreling down the side of the road. And I kind of tensed up. I've been in a lot of these situations where all of a sudden, you're recognizing everything that's happening around you, and you have to think about that. But we had like a 1-on-1 adult kid ratio, and, we kind of had a plan, and you'd think about those things. But again, the positive messages that they were hearing that day and coming away from it far outweighed my concern.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And Kendra, you also had that desire. And although you didn't make it to Missouri, you were in Atlanta. And there were some pretty important rallies in Atlanta.
Yeah, it was important for me to make sure my boys went out. But I need to say that we went to a vigil, and I haven't been as detailed in sharing with my boys, like the whole Ferguson thing. My children are 2 and 6. And so that's one of the questions that we're dealing with in my house personally. We're like, how do I reconcile it? And my 6-year-old said, well, what are we doing, Mommy? Why are we going here? And I said, we're going to, celebrate somebody's life. So it's important. I realize that I'm actually I'm treating my children as second generation protesters, because I actually protested the Iraq War with my mother outside the White House.
That's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking about. And we were, one of the things I was saying before the segment started was that there are a lot of people who saw this as that moment, right? Iraq War was a moment. Apartheid in the 80s was a moment for my generation.
I did that too, yeah.
Exactly. So if you're like a movement kid, then you sort of want your kids to be at certain things, partly so they can look back and understand that part of their formation intellectually and just psychologically was being part of activism.
It is, but it's very interesting because not many people would know. I don't think that's something I've told my friends. And, we live a very different middle class life. I'm a Mocha mom, and my husband and I are graduates of historically Black colleges. But at the end of the day, I'm still a Black woman living in America. My children are still Black children. We have been fortunate and blessed that our children aren't seeing the same things in the inner city. They're not seeing the same things in Ferguson. When I go into Atlanta to get my hair done, my son's like, Mommy, look at the police car. So it's a different experience. But you know what? At the end of the day, he still has to walk into this world, and people don't see him as anything other than a little brown boy. So, do you I have to.
Do you all worry, and this is for all of you, and maybe I'll start with you, Crystal, but do you all worry that because your lives might be a little bit different than those of your children's in terms of how you grew up,
right, that
somehow your children are missing the struggle, that somehow your kids won't get how bad things are because to some extent their class privilege might protect them from some of this stuff? Is that part of the reason why you're taking them to these protests, so they really get it?
Exactly. Because our generation, we kind of protect them and we raise them up so they won't experience so much of a struggle. However, they need to be in touch with reality. And so me as a parent, as a mom to my teenager daughters, I felt the need to allow them to go out to Ferguson from Atlanta because they needed to be in touch, because they had a passion when they saw all of the chaos on the news. However, I did my homework to make sure that when we did go, that we went in the daytime when it was a different type of protest going on, because they wanted to make a stand for justice, but I also wanted them to also be in a safe environment to do so. And because of that, they were able to have a great opportunity to participate in such a great, awesome move.
It sounded like you were about to jump in and say something else there, Kendra.
I think it is, but I think it's a hard thing because it's a different struggle. There are different things that we face. They're not the same blatant injustices, but I live in Georgia, so school segregation is an issue for me. And, you know, where we live and stuff like that, those are real issues, and how we're treated. And like, we're doing a March for Peace Saturday here in Atlanta, but we're going downtown. We're not going to necessarily do it in our back route because we're like, how safe will we be? So those are some real issues that we still deal with. You know, people still fly 2 blocks away from my house. Somebody still flies a Confederate flag every day.
Yeah.
Every day. And, you know, and I live in a very nice, racially, you know, mixed neighborhood and stuff like that. But that's the reality we live on. And that kid goes to school with my kid.
Wow.
So.
Well, I wanted to interject and say that I don't know if this class dichotomy is exactly the same as it would be for our fellow white citizens.
Yeah.
I think that Black people have to be much more wealthy to be totally disconnected from the working class and the working poor.
Yeah.
I mean, our families are notoriously multi-classed.
Yeah, they are.
The Black people's family reunions, you see every level.
Yeah.
So I don't see my children, you know, being so disconnected from working poor, working class roots.
And that's very important that you shared that, because as parents, African-American parents in American democracy, we have to have that talk with our children around white supremacy. The whole aspect of having that talk is very essential, because it can literally cost them their lives if we're not able to provide that talk with some protective factors that can help them, and also share with them that it's a world that will negate their humanity. It's a world that not just for Black males, but also for Black females. And so I think no matter what our class lines are, we have to have that talk with our children. And we have historical factors to really look at how when Martin Luther King did Birmingham, the letter from a Birmingham jail, that there were children that were part of that movement.
Exactly.
And so when you look at the Edmund Pettus Bridge and Bloody Sunday, there were children that were part of that. And so you all are to be commended for talking to your children about it. We have to make sure we deal with our children around racial identity, racial socialization, put those elephants in the room, and try to attempt to do it in a child development perspective that's age appropriate for our young people.
Chad, talk to me about the conversations we should be having with these people, or with our children, I should say, with these young people, because whether you go to the march or not, there's still Ferguson on the TV. There's still Ferguson in your neighborhood. And that's a reality we have to navigate. So how do we have that conversation? And you mentioned developmental appropriateness. Well, walk me through some of that. Like, for example, how does Betsy talk to her? Betsy, your children, you said 8?
They are 6 and 3.
6 and 3. I'm sorry.
Well, that's a great question, Mark. And you know, for a 3-year-old and a 6-year-old, it can be difficult. And so we have to find that language. We have to sit down in front of the television, and we have to let them know, you know, what they're watching, and try to interpret it in a manner in which they can understand. For young people who are a little bit older, we need to have that conversation and share with them that, hey, listen, because cops may fear you, which is based on, you know, the racial stereotype and the myths, or use words that they can understand, you know, you may get killed. And it's not just the Mike Brown situation. We have enough of these examples, and I think we all could reach consensus that we have Trayvon Martin. We can start from a historical perspective with the story of Emmett Till. I think it's a difficult conversation, but it's a conversation that we have to have nonetheless. I think also one of the things that we can do is we can do some play therapy, where we do some role playing with young people, you know, when a cop stops you, these are some of the things you can do. Not saying that any of these protective factors are going to save a child's life, but having that data may be something that can aid them to combat some of this white supremacy and some of these cops who are militaristic and are occupying our communities in a terroristic fashion. And I think that that's one of the things that we deal with. And I think with the killings that have happened, and you heard Dr. Hill say he wanted to take his daughter. I'm concerned about the trauma that is still at the scene of the killing of Mike Brown.
Yeah.
So from a psychological perspective,
well, talk to me about that too, Chad, because I mean, if you all, and I want your other people's take too. I just want to start with Chad because he has decades of experience. He's very old. He has decades of experience doing crisis intervention in sites of trauma. I've known Chad for a long time, so I can mess with him a little bit. But I mean, even with the Red Cross and work you've done in other places, I mean, you've done crisis intervention. There are children who are subjected to trauma day to day simply by being in places like Chicago or Philadelphia or Detroit. But in a case like this, where the entire world has its eyes on Ferguson after this boy was killed, how do people in that area process that, or how should we be encouraging children to process that?
We should be actually sending people who are trained in psychology, psychiatrists. We should be sending social workers or what we call community interventionists, mental health workers. We should be sending spiritual care. Doesn't matter what the faith is, to really talk about things with these individuals, because these children are, and it's just the community in general, are suffering from trauma, post-traumatic stress disorder, issues of abandonment. That mother is going through grief, sorrow. She's going through death and dying issues, compounded by frustration. And so I think one of the things we do, Mark, and you raise a great question, is that we send trained professionals into that community, into that catchment area, to have people share their pain, to share their grief in a constructive manner. And I think you do it in a milieu. And the milieu becomes really advantageous because you'll hear other people share their stories of suffering, and from a therapeutic sense, a trained professional can bring them together. It's similar to some of the work that I did over in Haiti with the Bill Clinton Foundation 4 weeks after the earthquake there. There were people who were just really upset, really mad, trying to find their loved ones. And I think Ferguson has an opportunity for the health professions, the mental health professions, to get on board and to really show what the profession of social work, psychology, and psychiatry is about. And we just can't discount faith, because faith is really essential in times of chaos as well.
Absolutely. Comments coming in from the HuffPost Live community. Generation X and Y, says Zev Hadash, really didn't have any social issues that were widely covered by the media. It's a good thing the next generation is being included in the protests. It is a good way to show them their voices count and will lead them to vote when they come of age. Vanessa Carmichael says, witnessing activism as a kid shaped my belief that little people can change big things by organizing. Tarana says, it may give them a different outlook on life, something to speak out for. Protests are to be peaceful advocacy for a just cause anyways. It's the opposition that has the responsibility to not aggressively react toward children protesters. That brings another point to me. To what extent can the presence of children at a protest create a different kind of, to use Chad's highfalutin intellectual language, milieu? How might having children there at an anti-violence rally change the disposition or the tenor of police who are pointing guns? Or how might the image treasure of militaristic police holding, AR-15s or AR-17s at children respond to the public consciousness or stoke the public consciousness in a different way? You talked about the long tradition of activism. Part of what the long tradition of activism in the Black freedom struggle has done is leverage moral authority. And at a moment where Black people are seen as immoral, as we always have, but at a moment where they're continuing to tear down Michael Brown, who's a child himself, almost, to have these small children, these little people at the event, does that change the conversation? Can that strategically be used to bring about a different kind of discourse?
I think it does. Let me backtrack for just a second and tell you how proud you would be of the mental health services, of the St. Louis Clergy Association, for pulling together an ecumenical group of, clergy who have been praying, leading opportunities to give food, water, assistance, pastoral care. There's also a group called Better Family Life, which has done a yeoman's work of bringing in social workers. And so that is definitely happening. You would be very proud of that. Not to mention the artists who come in and done public art projects, and of course those teachers that are being reported on who've gone to the library and held classes, even though classes have been canceled. But what you were asking, Mark, about the moral authority, of course, 4 little girls came to mind. I thought about how that was such a cauterizing and catalyzing event for the country as a whole, because who
For those that don't know, she's referring to the 4 girls at 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham when the church was bombed and they died.
Who can't sympathize with 4 babies going to Sunday school?
That's right. That's right.
So, I think that you're right. I think that the bodies of our children, are they're kind of rhetorical. They're kind of making a statement. And, it's whatever service you can be in service of justice. If just you being present can move us in some small way, then let the children serve.
Absolutely.
I can also,
Crystal, I wanted Crystal to jump in there.
Okay. I'm being a mother of teenagers. Being at the rallies and protesting is also awesome because they're in a different place. They understand what's going on. They understand what's taking place. However, they can be an agent of change. And so by them being positive and speaking up and speaking forward as the National Action Network does, it actually shifts the crowd and shifts especially the younger ones coming abroad to understand that not to use the old way of doing, but perhaps let's start a new change to bring about a change, a better change in a positive way. So I encourage for protesters to be even teenagers because they have the power and they have the courage and they have also the passion to make a change in a positive way if they have been instilled in them the positive ways to make a change.
It reminds me of during the 60s when we had children who we reviewed them through the lens of having, hoses sprayed on them. We had, German shepherds, that were attacking them. And it brought about more sympathizers and empathizers from a national perspective.
Yeah.
The question that we fundamentally need to ask ourselves are, is centered along the lines of America polices the world, but who polices America? And so having children out there and having people potentially attack children, we don't want our children to be attacked. We'll bring together.
But you have to remember we're in a different day. We're in a different day and time, and change has come. However, we're still progressing. We are in a different day. We are in a different time. And so change is progressively coming. It may not be all the way there, but it's progressively coming. And so they don't have their dogs. And I mean, when you look at the 40s and the 60s.
But they have their guns. They have their guns.
Right.
And that's
they have their guns, but they're not. I understand what you're saying. I understand exactly what you're saying, but it's not as it was back in the day. And we must be honest with that.
I don't know because I'm being honest, and sometimes 2014 looks a little bit like 1954. And so, when, Dr. Hill was on the ground with several other individuals all around the country, and who would think that in the year 2014, folk would be wearing masks for tear gas?
I have to tell you
what you're saying with that, but I'm sharing like February 1946, where Army Sergeant Isaac Woodard. I don't know if you're familiar with that situation, that story, but how he was approached by 2 police officers when he got off a bus after having a confrontation with the bus driver who was white. He got off the bus to 2 police officers and he tried to give his side of the story. But before he can give his side of the story, they took out their police nightsticks and they beat him upside his head and they gouged out his eyes. And he became blinded at the age of 27 for the rest of their life. However, if we fast forward to this day and time, we have also Mike Brown, Eric Gardner, Jordan Davis, Trayvon Martin that have experienced the same police brutality, but not on the levels as it was back in the day, because change is progressing. And we have to instill it in our homes. It has to start in our homes to bring about change, to bring about standing up for justice.
But Crystal, I'm going to tell you in all honesty, my father is a son of St. Louis. And that may have been why this resonated so strongly with me, because
Wow.
I talked with him and I said, Dad, it took me a couple of days. And I said, well, Daddy, what do you think? My family's there. My cousins are young Black men. They are there. They were marching. They're there in Ferguson. And I have been intentional in not reaching out to them to a certain extent because their Facebook posts are enough for me. So my father says, we knew not to go to North County. He said we couldn't go to North County until they got rid of Robinson. And, Robinson came and destroyed the community because they expanded the airport. So he said we didn't go out there. It wasn't until they got rid of Robinson that they let Black folks go out into Ferguson. He said that's what's going on. And I will tell you, I think what got me and what made me go, because if you read, I had 20,000 things to do that day. We had to stop at Barnes & Noble to do homework on the way to the march and everything.
That's real.
It's real. I'm a mom. But the reality of it is my baby will grow up to be a Black man one day.
That's right.
My lovely children, people love to always say they're so adorable and they're so cute, and they
The
are.
world doesn't see them that way.
You know what? It always amazes me. Old white ladies in Publix, the grocery store, they love to come up and say, oh, they're so cute. They're so cute. And I can't wonder when my son becomes 6 feet tall like my husband.
Wow.
What conversation? No, and my father, who's a son of St. Louis, he said, when are you going to have the talk with your boys?
That's right.
He said, I had to have the talk with your brother. He said, and my brother, and we grew up in California and Minnesota, so we grew up in a different racial atmosphere. He said, my father had the talk with me. My grandfather was from Mississippi. And he said, his father had to talk with him. Our families have been destroyed and torn apart and stuff like that. So, Crystal, while things are changing, they're not quite the same. They're not. Pardon me?
I embrace history. Totally.
Yeah.
I embrace it. What I'm trying to say is in order for change to come, we have to move forward. Change has come. We have a Black African-American man as president. In the White House, so they got to tell you that every white person does not feel the same.
One at a time. Let Crystal finish her thought. And Chad, I suspect you're going to disagree, and then we'll go to Betsy. Go ahead.
No. I don't disagree. I agree with everything she's saying. I'm just saying I don't think that's anybody here is disputing that there has been change.
No,
and we have come a long way.
But I'm trying to bring on why I'm trying to say that change is coming. But if we continue to go backwards and we meditate on the past, instead of trying to come together and put our heads together to bring important situations that can bring about a positive change, we're going to continue to go backwards instead of forward. Because evidently we see already that all whites are not doing racist. All white people are not racist. I know that for a fact. However, I believe what our problem and situation is in this day and time is a matter of the heart. We have people who have power that's behind these police badges that are doing hateful crimes. And it's not a Black and white issue. It's not a national Black and white epidemic. It is a heart epidemic. And we have to realize that some people are taught wrong in the homes. It starts in the homes. And they get out and they actually demonstrate what it is they have been taught. You're not born with hate. You're taught how to hate.
White males are being killed in American democracy by police officers. So it's more than heart. It's more than heart. I hear that what you're saying. I agree with you.
If you think about it, it is hard. I understand it's not just. I understand racism is still alive. I'm not saying it's gone. I understand it's still alive, but it's not in every individual's heart. So we have to understand not to put everybody in a category.
Before we go, we got to run. But I want to give Betsy a final word here because she hasn't jumped in yet. In a minute. Betsy, when we think about moving forward, what legacy do you want to leave for your children? What message do you want them to carry on? What torch do you want them to carry for the next leg of this freedom struggle?
Yeah, I think it's really important that we move forward. However, we still have Black men dying on the streets in St. Louis, and it feels like a very race-related issue here. And I do have this privilege of my white skin, and my kids go back to this white neighborhood. And I feel like St. Louis, and this is my personal opinion, but St. Louis has had this scab sitting here for a very long time. And I really hope that the tragedy that has happened will help groups of people in schools come together and start to have these important conversations so that we can move forward. We have to address what's happened, and it's still going to happen. And it's probably not going to happen to my kid because he's a different color. And I have to have that conversation with my kids and recognizing that. But I do see a lot of beautiful conversations happening almost every single night from a week from now. There are conversations happening in churches and schools and at the History Museum about coming together, healing our community, having a race conversation. And in St. Louis, it's so real. It gnaws at us in every single thing that we do. And so we definitely have to move forward, but we can't forget why we're doing it. And it still comes back to Michael Brown and that he died on that street. We had another Black man killed the other day, and we have to use that as an opportunity to address it and definitely move forward. And I'm really hopeful for St. Louis because I can see amazing things happening, and that's exciting.
Absolutely. It's exciting to see all this energy here in the midst of a tragedy. It's always exciting to see people turn pain into power, promise, and possibility. And bringing young people into the struggle for the next generation makes us think that it's just possible that we won't be having these types of issues 20 or 30 years from now. It's not a perfect world, but it can be a better one. Yeah, I agree with you all, man. I hope not, sincerely. Yeah, Crystal, Betsy, Chad, Kendra, Treasure, thank you all so much for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, and
Take care, everybody.
And thank you all for sharing your stories and being right here with us at HuffPost Live. Keep the conversation going by clicking that red button to be an on-air guest. The conversation always continues. Stay with us.